Oh, hello there. Surprise, this is not your usual adorable host, Dan Schneier. I am Jacob Gibbs, and I will be guiding us on our journey today. Welcome. You're tuned in to Fantasy Football today. You are going beyond the box score with us as always. Thank you for being here. Please do consider taking a moment. How do you like this, Dan? Right at the top. Take a moment to like the video, subscribe, help us grow, help us expand this show for all of the sickos out there who need more of the good content. Today, it is my honor to introduce Mike Wright of the Fantasy Footballers and the Spitballers, a comedy podcast. I've been following Mike's work for the better part of a decade now, which is incredible. He's truly one of my favorite analysts. He keeps it fresh. It's always fun listening to Mike and the Footballers talk ball. And what I appreciate so much about the Footballers, we have to do this with every guest. But like, I mean this with them. I really respect the originality and like the intentionality behind the work that they do. I think kind of our mission here with Beyond the Box Score is to kind of like expand awareness and help people deepen their awareness of all of the contextual stuff that you can bring into your football experience. And for me, like that happened so much through listening to Mike's show. Like when I was, I don't know, 26, 27, really learning to enjoy football more than just like red zone and touchdowns and cool plays and everything, like learning about all the usage and everything that goes into the final product that we get with fantasy football. I think they just do an incredible job of bringing a lot of energy and also a lot of like mindfulness to meeting NFL fans wherever they are at, in order to just help them be able to better enjoy the game. And that's obviously evidence in the massive success and growth of their brand. And that's been really, really cool to see. So thank you, Mike, so much for the work that you do. And on that note, I wanted to just give you an opportunity to share anything that you're working on right now. Maybe tell us about the Spitballers, because that's something I have not had a chance to check out. What's going on, man? How you doing?
I appreciate that intro. That is very kind of you because the uh, amongst our show, because look, we from the beginning have recognized like fantasy football is an entertainment space, and they're the nerd stuff is there. Trust me, that I love me a spreadsheet. Google Sheets,
Mhm.
just like especially now with AI being able to like help you out of like the part of the problem with spreadsheets is I don't like I know I need to do this, but what is the actual right question to ask Google so that the spreadsheet can do what I think it should be able to do? AI has helped that so much. But like we have all the nerd stuff, but along our ride, we're in our 10th season. Along the ride, we have every year we always hear like this show. It's not serious. There's like it's so many jokes, so many poop jokes. Like they don't watch. Do they even watch the football games? And it's like so. It's nice that you're at least understanding. No, we do. We watch all the games. We get into the really analytical numbers. We understand that fantasy football is entertainment, and while there is a niche inside the niche of fantasy football, the people who are just we are super data nerds, and that's all we want. The wide net of the show, which like we unabashedly we cast that is like our show is for the mass. It's for the public at large. We want people to, even if you don't like fantasy football, hopefully you can still like your spouse listens. Hopefully you can still palate our show, like because we're such morons a lot of the time, and like having a good time and joke. So, but it is very kind of you to see that we do actually care about the data side, and we're making the best probability. We'll call them educated decisions that we possibly can with the information that we have. So I mean, what's footballers? Look, we're in the grind right now. We're in the marathon of the season, so it's 5 times a week, wherever podcasts can be found. If you do like the nonsense part of our show, that's what the Spitballers is. It's just we put out 2 episodes a week. One is a new one. One is a we call it a spit hit. But at this point, we're over 300 episodes of that show, so chances are you probably haven't heard the old stuff too. But that's just like ridiculous would you rather's. We draft like fun drafts. The one coming out Monday is best fictional character to help you on a treasure hunt, or just something along those lines. So it's just if you, like it's just goofy nonsense. That's for everybody. It's not along with the footballers, I would say we are, quote, family friendly. I don't brand it that way because I know there's some connotations of, oh, like we're trying to keep it squeaky. No, it's just we're three dads, and if my kid wants to listen to my show, I want my kid to listen to my show, and he doesn't hear dad say words on the podcast that he doesn't hear dad say at home. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
there's a time and a place for certain jokes, but for our show, we keep it so that everyone can just listen to everything.
I love it. We have a family-friendly show here. We pushed the boundaries a little bit last week with fantasy points data and their new
Yes,
average separation score acronym. That was fun.
They've found their niche and they are going full force at it.
Yeah, they definitely like to push the boundaries and everything there, and that's fun. I like that. I like both sides of it. Yeah, so I really appreciate what you say about like keeping it fun. It is entertainment based. That's something Dan and I talk about a lot with Beyond the Box Score and wanting to make sure we keep that side of it intact. I know a lot of people come to us for like the really advanced analytical stuff, but at the end of the day, yeah, we are talking about a game, and that's inherently kind of silly. Like we don't need to take it so seriously. Let's have some fun with it.
And it has to be palatable. Like,
yeah, for sure.
Some of this stuff where it's really intense, and it's especially on an audio medium, it can be really hard to relay those things where it's not just number after number after number, big vocabulary explaining what the number is. It can be very difficult. So sometimes you got to just be like, no, trust, I do that stuff, but here's the too long didn't read of it.
We are going to get into the nitty gritty today. I have a question specifically for you, Mike. But before I do, I've got to introduce my guy, Dan. Dan, how are you doing, man?
Doing well today, Jacob. Excited to do this. And I think you both captured it well. In the end, like, people come here for data, but if you're not entertaining as a podcast and you can't capture the audience, there's no point to it, and it won't last long. So that's what we're trying to do, get a bunch of different voices on early and hear a bunch of different perspectives, and also do what we do best, Jacob, which is dive into the nitty gritty of it, the advanced stats, the target shares, all of the different things, what we see on tape, just different things. Our goal, as always, is to give you guys a little bit of an edge. Hopefully this season we'll be able to do that, but we're excited to get into it with Mike today.
Yeah, Dan's going to be in the analyst role today, which will be fun. Yeah, I feel like it's been a lot for you to fill the Adam Asia shoes and blend both, where you're doing an analysis and keeping us on track all the time and trying to keep it under 50 minutes. So it's going to be good for you to sit back. Have you caught up on sleep a little bit after the Giants game? I see you posted pictures with your celebrity friends on Twitter. Like, you still living life in the fast lane, and we slowed down a little bit.
Had a nice fun night out last night. Friend of mine, she's on Survivor, so a little bit of a watch party type deal. And then
yeah, she's casual.
Hold on.
Do you know the show, Mike? Are you a fan?
No, I would never ever watch Survivor, but Andy's a big time fan.
Okay.
But because that show's for old people. But you have a buddy who's on the show?
Yes, Rachel. She's on the show. She's doing really well. She had a little bit of a rough episode last night. Her number one got voted out, so she's got some work to do to get back in the good graces of the game.
Fun.
But
that's got to be super fun.
A lot of fun. We're rooting hard for her. But yeah, back to the football grind, Jake. I'm excited to talk some ball today.
Love it. All right. So my question for Mike, building off Dan's point about bringing in different perspectives. This is something I heard you say on late round perspectives last year with JJ Zachariason. I love JJ. Talk about nitty gritty. Yeah. Talk about nitty gritty. Nobody does it better than JJ. So I remember you saying that you have evolved as an analyst, mentioned adding per route data to your arsenal when it comes to fantasy football research. Absolutely love that. I have two questions related to that, to the evolution of fantasy football analysis. So the first is, do you have any thoughts on how we as a community are doing to make advanced research understandable and accessible? Like, I more specifically, do you feel like maybe we've lost the plot a little bit? I feel like sometimes we have, and maybe it would be better to kind of take a step back and redirect our focus to education, at least as much, if not more, than like just kind of a constant proliferation of deeper and deeper analysis. I think I really do think that the fantasy football community often leads the way when it comes to like new ways of thinking about football and pushing analytics into mainstream. So I do think it's important that like we really are mindful of like how we're doing that. So yeah, the first question is like, how do you think we're doing in that regard as a collective community? And then second, we'll focus on the positive here. What are some of the ways that has evolved over time, that you have really liked, that you've enjoyed over the years, and what are some that you would like to continue to see develop? Like we had Seth Wilder of ESPN Analytics on recently, and Dan brought up like it would be really cool if you had separation measured like specifically at the top of a route or at the breaking point of a route, or
Right.
like specifically off the line of scrimmage, like first press coverage. I love those ideas. I've always thought it'd be cool to have like tracking information on ball carriers, like stats related to like start stop ability or lateral explosiveness. I feel like basically I'm just like a kid who wants Madden ratings in real
Right.
life.
Yeah, you want it all.
Yeah. So yeah, you can take that any direction. I'm curious how this has all been to you, as you've observed it change over the years.
So I think where we're in a really cool spot, I think, of the data and people trying to find we're all trying to find the money ball, like the stat. This is the stat that if you're good at this, you're going to be great for fantasy football. The problem is that stat doesn't exist. And look, maybe we find it later. I don't think we will. Like there's too much chaos inside of the game of football, where baseball at the core of baseball, it's 1v1. So that is much easier to break down analytically of this, my guy the hitter, your guy the pitcher. Like I can find tendencies, I can find where success or failure happens much easier than like, hey, this wide receiver, he's got a great cornerback matchup. Oh, and then the center fumbled the ball on the snap, and now my guy, you know what I mean? Like there's just too much. So it's the part of data where I think we need to be careful is that getting too overconfident in finding that stat, like the one thing that is going to show this is where a player will succeed or this player will fail. So like it's a hard thing to articulate. I'm trying to think about the best way to do it. Of like again, just because of the chaos and trying to find it, but you can find stats where it can turn into good fantasy stuff, because it's essentially a way of figuring out, is a player actually good? Should that player get an opportunity, they could excel. Like that. That's kind of the road. But we need to explain that in a way that player might not ever get opportunity. Like I can believe in these behind the scenes metrics. Like for example, Dontayvion Wicks is a pretty easy one to talk about, where the targets per route run, the yards per route run, all of these things that signal that he's a good player. Should he get opportunity? Yeah, they're all there. That doesn't mean he's going to get on the field more. They have 4 really good wide receivers that they're going to rotate through, and then injuries play a factor in who's going to get an opportunity. So it's more of a just like being honest and open about the data, that this is not the be-all, end-all of everything. Like if I tell you this person's elite at targets per route run or yards per route run, doesn't mean they're going to get on the field, right? That's the coach. You know, so much of the running back position is, will the coach put my guy on the field? and how does that coach handle things? Does that coach believe in a 3-down running back? Does that coach believe, no, we need to keep people fresh, and I want 2 guys who can do the same thing, and they can mix and mingle on those things? Do I want job-specific running backs? Okay, now if we're in a job-specific running back, this guy is better on the ground. This is the passing downs guy. Now I got to figure out what's the game script going to be. And figuring out game script, while it's a game of probability. That's another thing that we do try and stress of. I'm going to get so much wrong, but I hopefully will get more right than I will get wrong, because weird stuff happens in a game script of like, this team on paper should dominate Team Y, but any given Sunday, Team Y, something might just go right for them because Team X has so many things, just small things go wrong. You know, it's a data. It can be the a map towards a better probability odds of a certain outcome. But it's not 100%. Nothing in football is 100%. Literally nothing is 100%. So that's where we talk about focusing on doing all those things because they are important. Because the probability is the edge that makes you a successful fantasy football player. But there's just so much more to it than actual player analysis. We talk about the game holistically of you got to know how to play the game of fantasy football. You got to be locked in. Know who's on people's rosters. Know, oh, I'm looking ahead. This is my opponent in 2 weeks. I know that they're kind of light on running backs. So maybe I'm going to be more aggressive on this week's waiver wire going for running back because I know that they're going to need one, or a tight end, or the quarterback. Their quarterback is on bye in 2 weeks. Who's the best streaming option in 2 weeks? Should I pick up that quarterback right now? Those types of things are not that's not data. Like that's not the analytics of how a player performs on the field. You have to understand your game. Like, you know what I mean? I saw a tweet making the rounds. I don't remember who was asking about it, so I apologize. Can't credit them, but it was they were talking about going into Monday night. James Cook gets ruled out, so an opponent picks up and drops Ray Davis and Ty Johnson, and for whatever reason, what platform they are, it locked them.
That was us, right?
Was
that
it
Adam?
you guys?
I think it was Adam Mazer in
Okay.
CBS.
Yeah, I didn't want to speak out of turn. I thought it was Adam. But it's like, should this be allowed? Yes, because that's the game you are playing. If it's allowed in the system, it's allowed. Like when you have players on your IR. So we play on the sleeper platform a lot. I can have players in my IR. If they're ruled out, I can make all these waiver claims. Now I can get extra players on my team. My team is technically now illegal because I have too many guys on the squad. But if the platform allows it, those are the advantages that I'm going to take because that's how you get that slight edge. So that's a whole word salad and a lot of things to digest for people out there. But it's understanding that data is really important, but it is not everything. And really understanding the actual game and strategy of fantasy football, not just what the players are doing on the field, is really important.
I agree wholeheartedly with you about that, Mike. And I think a lot of the time, so for example, I'll just use an example of what I do. I do a podcast on the side. It's a Giants podcast, and it's very specific. We talk about the players. We talk about the tape.
Right.
But what we really love to do, me and my co-host, is talk about the 30,000-foot view stuff as far as roster building, construction, things of that nature that will lead to better out. Like for example, we're so focused, like you said, on the data. Dontayvion Wicks is a great example, right? All the data suggests he's the free agent pickup. Use your budget. And then when it doesn't happen, you're kind of asking yourself why. When in the meantime, like you said, if you look ahead and you can tell, like, for example, one of the best things I like to do in fantasy football, a little edge I give myself, is take a look at schedules coming up and make trades based on that. At the same time, you're trading for players who are not hot at that moment. They're not being talked about. The data is not showing they're right. But their schedule coming up is so much more important than the data and what they've done in the past. Because when we look at the data, it's all based on things that have happened, and we're using that to try to predict things that will happen, which is fine. Sometimes that will work, but there's other ways to predict things that will happen. There's other ways to get edges. Some of the things you've mentioned, I think is very important to focus on that kind of stuff. And that kind of segues nice into our conversation today about a lot of these players. First one I want to talk about, I'm going to switch it up a little bit, Jacob, is James Cook, because what I see from a lot of teams is James Cook's out last week. Ray Davis gets on the field, plays a crazy amount of snaps, has a crazy amount of usage. To me, it's the Bills saying to us, we know what we've got here. We've got a Ferrari in the garage. We're not going to use him a lot because we've got James Cook. But the moment James Cook is out, we want to test this Ferrari out. We want to give him everything we can put on his plate from a pass protection standpoint, passing downs, and put him in these spots where he's a receiver down the field because we want to see what he's capable of if we need him to be. So I think that's really interesting. But I also want to talk to you about future of James Cook right now. Like, where are fantasy managers at with him? We've got a lot of questions about him this week. And then Ray Davis as well. Is he somebody you would stash on the bench? And do you see that workload changing at all as the season evolves?
So that's another thing of like the James Cook was a my guy for me this year. Like I felt really confident in the player's talent. I felt really confident in after Joe Brady took over, what the trend that happened that in the second half of last year for the Bills. I felt really confident. That's what will happen. That's what's going to continue here for the Bills. And then you get this variable that you can't predict. Misses one game, because he's got a boo-boo on his toe, and now all of a sudden the Bills know this isn't just practice. This is on an NFL field. The backup running back is a good player. And I feel like I can confidently say after one performance of Ray Davis against with the Jets, Ray's good. And now now what does the team do with that information? And that goes back to what I'm saying about a coach, opportunity. Who's the coach going to put on the field? It's probably James Cook, because I think James Cook is still a better player overall than Ray Davis. But now the Bills have an opportunity of, hey, you know what? We can get James a little bit more rest on a per game basis, where James Cook is still, for all of his greatness, he's about like a mid 50 percentile snap type of a player. Does that go down even a little bit now? That those are factors that you can't foresee. There's no data that tells you that this is what's going to happen now with the coach and their philosophy of thinking how a game is going to go. So for James Cook in particular, I'm still very confident in him as a player. But if I'm the Bills, how do you not put Ray Davis on the field in more opportunities? And the huge problem that we've had over the course of the career for James Cook has been goal line work, which Josh Allen still was doing his thing of like, hey, Ray, carry me down to the end zone. I got it from here, Ray. Don't worry. Big boy Josh Allen's going to take care of these touchdowns for you. But what if Ray Davis is now, they're like, oh, he did great. He did great inside the 5. We'll put him in there. Like, that's catastrophic if that goes away for James Cook. I'm not going to project it, but I have to be willing to admit that this is now in the range of outcomes for the remainder of the season for James Cook.
So Dan and I were kind of down on James Cook coming into the year, and it was
You
for
fools.
that. it was for that reason. We play a long game. We play a 17-week game, not just the week 1 through 6 game. It's nothing against James Cook. It's that I really did believe in Ray Davis, and then also the Josh Allen factor. I was worried about his ability to get red zone touches. So what I want to do with each of these guys, we've got a list of 8 or 9 players we're going to get today, is just kind of provide some historical comparisons for them and try to contextualize what they're doing and what we might be able to expect. I brought up Cook because I do think it's important to talk about him right after the Ray Davis breakdown or breakout. And I just wanted to point out that while I think a lot of the Beyond the Box Score listeners might be all aboard Team Ray Davis, they're like, I want Ray Davis is going to take over this backfield. You know what I mean? And I wanted to just throw a little cold water on that because James Cook, like you said, Mike, is a very good player. So his what he's done so far is really impressive. He had 1,000 yards at 24 or younger, and there are a bunch of guys that have done that. That's happened 87 times. Lots of studs, a few randos, but a lot of really good players. His performance falls right in the middle in terms of fantasy scoring. But if you filter it to just include players under 200 pounds, it's just him and Jamal Charles. So it's really, we are already dealing with an outlier type of player here. I wanted to lower the number of guys. Just 1,000 yards at 24 or younger was 87 running backs. So I filtered it to 24 or younger, drafted around 3 or higher, because I do think it's important that the Bills feel committed to Cook, at least somewhat, I would think. Had 1,000 yards of rushing, 200 or more PPR points, with an RB rush share below 65%. His is at 62%. This is the percentage of the team's running back rushes. 62% last year for Cook, 66% this year. And I think this group is interesting because it's players who got to this 200 plus PPR point with really extreme efficiency. And Cook in particular, he didn't have the touchdowns. And so him being part of this list is really impressive. So it's Jamal Charles, Darren McFadden, Chris Johnson. I think this is going to be so fun to go through some of these older players today. I hope it doesn't alienate in the audience who doesn't know these guys, but I think a lot of our audience will. Jeremy Hill, Joseph Adai, Ryan Matthews, Jonathan Taylor, Leonard Fournette, Stephen Ridley, Ray Rice, Travis Etienne, Clinton Portis, Rashard Mendenhall. So there are some players, if he's just a Mendenhall type of guy, it's like maybe he doesn't hold on to the workload. No disrespect to Mendenhall. He was awesome. I really loved watching him. But I think there's a lot of guys in here that are like legit stud running backs. And I think he kind of does belong in that group. And then the other thing I wanted to bring up in reference to like losing the goal line role is that early season notes in that regard were really encouraging. Josh Allen, I believe the touchdown he got last week was his first touchdown and first carry from inside the 5-yard line all year. But up until this point, it's been all James Cook. So do you have anything else? Dan, I'm kind of curious where you're at on because of where we started at the beginning of the year. Like, has he shown you enough that you're like, all right, respect James Cook. We were too low.
So it's interesting with Cook because it goes to what we've discussed kind of this whole pod as far as the 30,000-foot view stuff go. Because I think you remember this, Jacob. I was super high on him as a prospect. I loved his tape, and I was one of the key person telling, like, look, this guy knows how to run the football. He's just like Dalvin. He's so good at tempoing his runs and setting up his blocks. The issue for us was always touchdowns. We've seen him actually score in a few different ways this year, which has been interesting. A few more of those longer runs, and then obviously the red zone stuff, which we didn't get a lot to see last year. I am a little concerned, though, with Ray Davis. I think he showed enough that he really can't be taken off the field. He also showed that he can. The biggest thing for me is he showed he can be played on all 3 downs if they need him to. That doesn't mean I think he's going to take over this role like you were saying before. It's just a matter of, will he be somebody who can get a hot hand and play a series, right, where he wasn't before? So rest of season, I'm looking at James Cook more along the lines of somebody a little bit closer to I had him before the season. But the key carryover that we can't deny is that this offense has remained the same under Brady as it was during those last 6 games that had that sample size of James Cook dominating. And that doesn't appear to me to be changing. Cooper could change things a little bit, but the way I thought this offense would evolve through Dalton Kincaid is simply not happening and doesn't appear to be happening all year, which changes the pie, it adds a little bit more of that pie chart to somebody like James Cook, a player who's obviously one of their most talented and most explosive players in the offense.
Yeah. All right. Good stuff. Next guy, same draft class, drafted 22 picks ahead of James Cook, Kenneth Walker. We'll talk about him and then transition to some receivers. So Kenneth Walker, man, I did not have enough respect for Kenneth Walker coming into this year.
You fools.
I know. Just looking at some of the running backs that fall in the same range as him historically, and then looking at what he's done already this year, I think it makes a lot of sense to be really, really excited about Kenneth Walker. So he had 1,000 yards at age 22, and there are only 13 running backs who have done that at age 22 or younger. The running backs who I thought were interesting to compare him to in terms of statistical output were Todd Gurley and Marshawn Lloyd, because those two also had low success rates, rushing success rates earlier in the career. If you guys are unfamiliar with that stat, it's a successful run if you get half of the yards or more required on first or second down. On third or fourth down, if you get a first down, that's a success. Kenneth Walker's was really low early in his career. People thought it might be a problem that he was always trying to create explosive plays. He's really shored that up over the last 2 years. It's been much better. And that was a problem for Gurley and Lloyd early on. They ended up getting much better at that as their careers went along. One big difference was those guys each had 40 or more receptions in year 2. Walker only had 29, but he's currently on pace for over 80 receptions this year. Saquon Barkley actually profiled very similarly as well in terms of being an early pick, similar size and speed, similar early rushing profiles, but again, had much more receiving production early on. And that's just why, to me, it's so interesting that we're seeing it all come together for Walker now in terms of the receiving profile. So I'm curious, Mike, how realistic you think it is that Walker's receiving contributions continue. I know it's a little bit bloated by kind of garbage time receptions in the last game.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but you can take that however you want with Ken Walker.
I mean, I think you have to be really optimistic. Saquon Barkley was the name I was going to bring up. Of Walker reminds me of him. Where go back to Saquon's the electric rookie season. I mean, so much he would get all or nothing. Like there was I can't remember the stat because it's years ago, but it's like if he's not ripping off a humongous run, he's getting like 2 yards a carry, because he's always looking for it. And Walker does have a little bit of that built into just how he plays the game because he can. And it's like if you have that ability, you're going to be looking to do that. I'm like, I want to score on every single time I touch the ball. I'm Kenneth Walker. I have that ability. And I know that that's something that it can happen. And this is the thing of like the data, you know what I mean? Of like, well, is Kenneth Walker a good pass catcher? his production profile in college there's not really a ton there. The first couple years, he's not really used like that, so maybe he can't. Yeah, no, I mean he's fine. Like I'm not calling him Breece Hall or McCaffrey or anything like that, but he's not Jordan Howard. Like the dude can catch the ball, and it can be a smooth type of a thing of the catch, turn up, get a huge play. The offense, like the Russell Wilson / Pete Carroll years, that's not what they did. You know, it's the tendencies of just the offense as a whole, and also tendencies of the quarterback. So that was the somewhat sketchy thing is the targets last year, in which he had 37 targets. He did miss a handful of games, but it was like, okay, I don't know what we got here. But for Ryan Grubb and company to come in and all offseason, like, no, Kenneth Walker can get that done. Guys, we're telling you, we're going to throw the ball to Kenneth Walker, and then to see it immediately, like that changes everything for Kenneth Walker as a fantasy football player, where each and every week, talk about last year's scheme, Kenneth Walker could be a top 5 running back on any given week. But you're going to have weeks where he overpresses, doesn't hit the big play at all, and then he doesn't catch any passes. And so you're just like, you're really bummed out. Oh, Kenneth Walker, what a bum. What a terrible week he had. The probability of a bad game is much lower. It's still not impossible, because it's not impossible for anybody. But it's lower now. If we're going to get 4+ targets a game, I'm not expecting 8 that was the game script of we got to catch up, and Kenneth Walker, like, they're covering the wide receiver, so we're just going to keep chunking it down to Kenneth Walker. But if you take out some of the risk of a bad game, while you still equally hold on to the upside, and actually the ceiling does go up. It's like, think about it, it's almost like the elevator, right? The whole elevator has gone up. The floor is higher and the ceiling is higher for Kenneth Walker, because that is now a part of the game, and just the way that the offense is running and the snaps. It was like, I don't blame you guys at all for coming into this year being like, I don't know on Walker. That was how kind of the most of fantasy football felt about Kenneth Walker. I think he was a 4th-round pick or so, because you still have the Zach Charbonnet draft pick was it infected people. I was super infected. Like, when it happened, I was legitimately depressed, guys. Kenneth Walker was I took him in my dynasty league. I think I took him like 4th overall. I bypassed some of these really awesome wide receiver prospects, which it's not worked out for all of them. But at the time, it was, these are 1st-round can't-miss wide receivers. How are we not drafting them? And I went with the running back. It was a little bit sketchy. The rookie year is awesome, and I have a top 5 dynasty running back, and then freaking Pete Carroll spends a 2nd-round pick on Zach Charbonnet, and that poisons and infects your thought on Walker for a long time. It ran into this year, because his sophomore year was, I think, viewed negatively, when it was actually not bad. It's not bad. It's not that far off of his rookie season. His rookie year, it was 12.6 a game in half point. The sophomore year was 12.3 points per game in a half-point scoring format. It was not far off. So it's wild how things outside of Walker's control can infect us, and we're not sure what to do with them. But getting back to it, sorry, I got on a tangent there. If this receiving work is going to be there, and I do think it will be, because this is what they told us they were going to do, and then they showed us, I'm going to believe it. Like, I'm going to believe the actions of the team. Again, 8 receptions a week, probably not. But if we got that floor of 3 to 4 receptions a week, that is gold.
I think the Charbonnet corollary to, like, what we just talked about, James Cook and Ray Davis, is important, because it's, again, like, we like Charbonnet, we like Ray Davis, but if the lead back is a special player, and especially if the coaching staff freaking loves him, like, that's what's most important. I do think there's evidence that Walker really is a special player. So here's just from a size-speed combo perspective, since 2000, there have been 6 running backs to rush for 1,000 yards in a season, 23 or younger, who ran a 4.4 or faster at 205 pounds or heavier. It's Walker, Saquon, Jonathan Taylor, twice. Adrian Peterson and Kevin Jones in Detroit, 2005. I love Kevin Jones and Jordan Howard references today. But like, that's a really good list, you know? Like, would we be worried about Jonathan Taylor losing work? Would we be worried about Adrian Peterson losing work to a second or third round running back? Like, I love Charbonnet, but I think Walker does profile as a special player. He's been improving each year. His early career success rates have only gotten better, leads the NFL in avoided tackle rate. All of his advanced rushing efficiency numbers keep going up. And now we get receiving contributions. Like, there are a lot of people, I've seen it this week on fantasy Twitter, that are asking, why not Ken Walker RB1 overall? You have thoughts on that, Dan?
Well, I think the key thing is, like, tying it back to kind of the theme of the discussion today, I really like the point that Mike made, because okay, we're looking for ways we can kind of get an edge. And one way is trying to find some of the flaws in the data. And one of the flaws in the data is using the data of what has happened to predict what's future. So, for example, I'll use an example from this year's draft class. We evaluated Malik Neighbors. He was drafted by the Giants. One of the concerns for him, the knocks, was can he beat press man coverage? But the reality of the situation is, just because he wasn't asked to beat press man coverage at LSU, they lined him up in the slot. The way that defenders played him, they didn't play him with a lot of press. They played him a lot of off. Doesn't mean he couldn't do it. And then we saw him get to the NFL level. And you had some great data on this earlier this year, Jacob. He had the number one, at least before his injury, he was number one in the league in yards per out run while getting press man coverage. So it's similar to Walker, right? Just because he wasn't really used as a receiver and the data shows not really used. Same thing happened with Jonathan Taylor out of Wisconsin. Never got any receptions with Wisconsin. Wasn't part of their system and wasn't part of their scheme to throw balls to the running back. Doesn't mean that he can't do it. And we saw that with Taylor. He was, he's not a great receiver, but he's capable of doing it. And Walker is a similar in that regard. So if he's capable of doing it and getting him the ball in space leads to more forced missed tackles, more avoided tackles, because he's such a talent, they're going to use him in that way. They're not going to lean back on the historical data and say, oh, Michigan State didn't use Walker in the passing game, we can't do it, remember? Because that's not how this works. And I think that's the important takeaway there. And also what I really love about Walker, which can kind of lead to maybe him being more RB1 centric the rest of the way, is just getting out of that Shane Waldron run scheme, because he was just not a fit for that. And we talked about it a lot last year, Jacob. He was so much better in power gap man scheme versus zone scheme. And Ryan Grubb's they're still running zone, but they're finding different ways to use him, some duo, some inside zone, and different ways to just get him going and fit to his skill set. That's still important in fantasy football, like finding the right coaching staffs and the right schemes that know how to fit their players into that scheme. So I think a lot of it will depend on Geno Smith and the way this offense is moving. I haven't loved some of the developments in the offense as time has gone by with Grubb, and that's going to obviously cap his ceiling if that offense doesn't score a lot of points. But I am intrigued by the skill set, and I like how they're using him a lot more this year. All right, let's take a quick break to hear a word from our sponsors. We've gone a little long. We might have to, after this, do a little rapid fire as we move through, but we'll get to a few more players after this.
Can I get a spot real quick?
Yeah, sure, man. Hey, wait a minute. You're Dave Richard from FFT.
Yeah.
Huh. Hey, I snagged Alvin Kamara in the 4th round. What do you think?
Is it PPR?
Yeah, full point.
All right, we're back.
How many plates is Dave moving over?
Right?
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing, Mike.
Dude, what?
That was unbelievable, that commercial. I mean, Dave's a big dude. He can probably bench press.
Elite bench press. I had no idea.
Yeah, he is an elite bench presser. I can't wait to tell Dave about this. He's going to love this. But let's go a little bit more rapid fire through some of these players. I want to get your historical comps on them, Jacob, and then get Mike's thoughts on them. A player that Jacob and I were telling buy, trade for him before that window closes for last month and a half, it feels like, is Drake London. And big reason is going into this new offense, it's a McVay principle offense. They're using him a lot like they used Puka, a lot like they used Kupp in the past, those easier targets to get. So let's start with you, Jacob. Maybe give it a historical comp for what we're seeing from London, and then let's find out what Mike thinks of him rest of way.
So London is not easy to find comps for. This man had a 29% target share as a 21-year-old, which is absolutely absurd. There's really no one who's done that. He currently has a 27.6% target share at the age of 23. So receivers who have had a 27% target share at 23 or younger: DeAndre Hopkins, Justin Jefferson, Mike Evans, Odell Beckham, Garrett Wilson, CeeDee Lamb, David Boston, 2001 Arizona Cardinals, had a huge season, 300 PPR points, Andre Johnson, Dwayne Bowe, Calvin Johnson. So what's interesting to me about London is obviously the targets are there, and we are seeing him use more of the middle of the field, which creates more yak opportunities, more yardage upside. But what's really unique about his profile is the red zone involvement. I just tweeted this out last night as I was prepping for this. He has since 2000, he has the highest red zone target share through an initial 3 seasons of any player. The only one who's even close, really, is Calvin Johnson. And so that's like, you don't ever want to compare people to Calvin Johnson. And obviously, that's not what we're doing with Drake London here. But all of the underlying data on London, including his final season at USC and then getting picked top 10 overall, everything is suggested that this guy is like truly like a transcendent elite talent that could be one of the absolute best receivers in the NFL. But the framework was so bad. And now it's actually looking really pretty good, where the Falcons are playing super fast, they're passing a lot, and Kirk Cousins is playing pretty well. And Kyle Pitts is kind of an afterthought. I think he's 4th on the team in first read target share. Drake London is 1st in the entire NFL in first read target share since week 2. So the offense is completely centered around London. I have him at wide receiver 5 rest of season. Am I getting ahead of my skis here, Mike? Or what do you think about all this?
I don't think you are. Like I'm on today's show, we were talking about Drake, and it was my quote is like it's happening. Like this, just let it wash over you. The Drake London that we hoped we were getting, it's happening. And I was on the side of draft risk. Like reward was massive, but the draft risk was very large for Drake London. Of just like, speaking of data, we don't have data on on old quarterbacks coming back who have torn their Achilles on their plant leg. You know what I mean? Like, and then to go in on his primary wide receiver in whatever it was, like the late 2nd round, that was difficult for me. Like, so I don't have a bunch of Drake London over here because I was looking at other guys around him that I felt were that had an upside like him, but without as much risk. And the risk, like those first 2 weeks when it was, like no play action or whatever in the first week, and that was like, oh boy, we are in line here for a tough time. But knowing that, of course, Kirk will get more comfortable, he'll heal over the season. I didn't think it was going to be week 3.
Yeah.
I didn't think it was, oh, I just have 2 bad weeks and now, hey, we're back to Kirk Cousins. Kirk on film, he still doesn't look as strong. Like the throwing of the ball is not as effortless. At least like in my peon opinion of trying to grind the film on quarterback play. Like, he looks like when he's throwing, he's really trying to throw that ball, but it hasn't been a problem. The football IQ is still very high. The scheme is, the McVay scheme is, like, it's pretty close to undefeated, of just being able to take this, spread this around, and you're probably going to have success if you go with these principles, because they're like they maximize taking advantage of the data, of the rules of football, of what we can do. And Drake London, being the draft pedigree he was, the production profile, and now actually matched with a competent and good quarterback, it also speaks to just how bad the quarterback play was for him over those first couple of years. And again, that's a thing that is outside of Drake London's control. Like, can your the Malik Neighbors? Can he do press? I was more concerned about, can Daniel Jones get him the ball, or and if he can't get him the ball very well, will he just say, screw this, I'm throwing almost every target to Malik Neighbors? And I think we've gotten okay Daniel Jones, and we've gotten the full DGAF. I'm going to throw the ball to Malik Neighbors because he's just better than everybody. Like, so that has worked out tremendously despite the risk of the draft cost. Drake London he's kind of that in that same boat of he has erased the risks, and now for Drake, it is really just how high can it go? Like, how good can he actually be? I don't think top 5 is, like, I don't think that's overly aggressive for what we're seeing of the last few weeks here for Drake. The fact that this team plays up tempo, like this Falcons Seattle game, I am very excited to see how many plays run we get, because
Kirk versus Geno, man. It's gonna be
Yeah,
so fun.
it's going to be great. I mean, we should get like close to 600 passing yards in this game to divvy around to our players. It's going to be fantastic. So, yes, I am with you that I think that this is not just a hot streak here for Drake. I think that this is a corner has been turned. Kirk looks healthy enough that we're going to get elite Drake London moving forward.
On your point about the McVay system helping him, I want to segue to our next two guys here, which is the Green Bay Packers with Matt LaFleur. And just coaching is so important. And we see that in the efficiency metrics of Jayden Reed and Tucker Kraft. And so I'm going to do my best to contextualize where these guys are at because we really have seen some insane things from the two of them early on. I'm going to start with Kraft because I think that's an easier and quicker discussion than we're going to get into Reed. So Tucker Kraft, I think this will really surprise people. I brought up that he was literally dead last in separation score among qualified tight ends, and I was a little bit worried about that. And so I looked at players last year who were successful fantasy tight ends but didn't have good separation scores. It was David Njoku and Jake Ferguson. And I thought that is actually a really interesting comparison. Njoku as a player maybe, and Ferguson as like a fantasy profile. I just don't like comparing players to Njoku though, because he's really a special talent in my opinion, especially after the catch. And I got some pushback on that on Twitter where it's like, well, actually his Tucker Kraft's yak ability is like really similar to Njoku's. And then I looked it up and it's true. This guy's averaged 7.5 yards after the catch for his career. Njoku was at 7.4 last year. That was the best mark of his career. And so I've got here is a list of players who have averaged tight ends 7.5 yards after the catch per reception on at least 40 receptions. And it's a really short list. Martellus Bennett is probably the least productive name. Well, actually, Vance McDonald clearly is the least productive. But then we've got Rob Gronkowski, Dallas Goedert, Vernon Davis, Evan Ingram, George Kittle. He basically has one season of data, and that's where he's at. And I think that is really, really interesting. Oh, also, I missed Jermichael Finley is another fun name. I don't know what to think of Kraft. I do think that the system boosts things for him, and I wasn't super into him as a receiving prospect, but he's actually a better athlete than I realized. I think I just got a little bit too into the he's a blocking tight end profile when I viewed him, but like the more I've looked at him, he's a really interesting player, and he's young and he's breaking out, and Musgrave is hurt, so he's got a runway to be really productive here. Where do you guys view him rest of season? Like clearly behind somebody like Jake Ferguson and Njoku, or about in that range?
I think for me, I have him just after like the Jake Ferguson range. The thing with Kraft, I love his tape at South Dakota. I felt like South Dakota State. I felt like he was just phenomenal after the catch. And
watching Jackrabbit tape, dude. That's awesome.
I was watching it because you know who put me onto him? Dane Brugler was like, "This dude, watch this dude. This dude can play." And so I watched him a little bit because the Giants were in the mix for a tight end that year, and it was just all after the catch stuff that was really exciting to me. Obviously, you know they've produced some pretty good tight ends there. Dallas Goedert came from there as well. But it was different watching Goddard versus him because I felt like Kraft had a little bit more after the catch ability, and that excites me always for fantasy. It's one of the reasons why it's led to good picks and bad picks. Of course, Trey McBride was not my favorite player after the catch, but he does so much other stuff that he's been able to make up for, especially in PPR leagues. But Kraft's ability to make plays after the catch will lead to some of these longer touchdowns that we've seen in these explosive plays. And we know in fantasy these days, the tight end position, one big play can define an entire week. So for me, I'm okay putting him in that range just after Ferguson as somebody, who I would start every week, especially Musgrave on IR.
He would definitely be behind Ferguson for me because Ferguson's the number 2 guy for Dak. You'll still have some bad games, but you can feel pretty confident in the volume for Jake Ferguson.
Kraft or Kincaid?
I'll probably still go Kincaid there. That's the hard part for Tucker Kraft is one. I mean, it's obviously easier now, but it's the getting over. This is almost like a full-on Mark Andrews situation of Luke Musgrave was drafted before Tucker Kraft, and Hayden Hurst was drafted before Mark Andrews. And you're like, oh, that's weird. I liked Mark Andrews as a prospect way more than Hayden Hurst. And you're like, well, now you're going to have to use that guy. But the Packers made this switch really quick. It happened in week 1, regardless of what the injury situation was. it was only 3 targets, 2 for 37, but a 96% share of the snaps. There was tiny little whispers that started coming out right before the season of looks like the Packers actually prefer Tucker Kraft now over Luke Musgrave, and it didn't get loud enough for me to really pay attention to it. But you heard it, so it's like one of those things. Okay, maybe I need to pay more attention to that moving forward for fantasy football. The hard part for Kraft is it has to be the big plays. The 9 targets against Minnesota, like that real breakout, I think that's the outlier. We're all trying to solve the puzzle that is the wide receiver core for Green Bay, and the kind of like the general acceptance of what it's going to be is Jayden Reed's the number 1, and then you're going to flip flop. Sometimes Romeo Doubs will have 2 touchdowns. Sometimes it'll be Wicks. Sometimes it'll be Watson. It's just now Tucker Kraft is in that. Sometimes it's going to be Tucker Kraft. Jordan Love is running really, really hot right now in terms of touchdown percentage. A little too hot for those numbers. They will more than likely come down, especially when you have Josh Jacobs on the team. So I'd put him behind Ferguson. David Njoku has been he's a hot topic on our show because I love the players so much. Our joke on the show is like, okay, what's his target share at? You're like, oh, he got 9 targets or whatever. You're like, okay, well those are Watson targets. You have to cut those in half. That's like a regular tight end getting 4 targets because the Cleveland offense is just so horrifically bad.
It's crazy.
And the only way to fix it, the only way is the team admits defeat and puts Jameis Winston in.
Deshaun Watson threw 44 catchable air yards last week.
Oh my God!
Like it's one of those things where it's now we've been talking about Watson. It's ad nauseum now of like I don't want to just keep talking about how bad Watson is, but you have to because it's so catastrophically bad that it destroys everybody on the team. Yeah, that maybe some more targets will be there for Njoku, but how long? What's that career at for David? The guy's been in the league for a very long time. We're in what?
Drafted in 2017.
We're in season 8.
Yeah.
We're in season 8 here, and the true breakout that was Joe Flacco. If you go dive into the numbers, yeah, when Watson was playing last year at the beginning, there was an okay connection with Njoku, but we all still have the end of season. David Njoku was a league winner. He full-on league winner. Part of that you do have to remember what happened. He had the best remaining schedule for the tight end position, and tight end schedule matters. Matchups matter, I think, way more than people realize. Like the matchups are so important, especially for the tight end position. You line up how that happened with the exact timing of that Joe Flacco came in, and we all found out that Joe Flacco is not toast. He's fine. So that I can't get into Njoku. It's one of those takes where I'm like, if it happens, I'll be really happy for him, and it can happen on somebody else's team. Like I'm willing to be wrong that it's going to happen for him at anything that is a substantive level of production and not just a game here or there.
Yeah. So I had mentioned that I think Kraft might be a sell a week ago, but I do kind of want to back off on that. The more I've dug into this, it's like, this is really impressive what he's done. And he has 3rd round draft capital. He was drafted behind Musgrave, but it's not like he was drafted in the 5th round or something.
And his team,
yeah,
the offense as a whole, like if at the end of the day, you're like, oh, my tight end, he doesn't get all this volume, but he's on a really high powered offense that's going to score 20 plus points every week. Okay. That's a fine play. Everyone else's tight ends suck. Why not have a guy who's like got a pretty good shot at a touchdown or at least a big play?
And I really don't know that Love's touchdown regression is necessarily imminent. The Matt LaFleur has produced passing touchdowns in terms of like the rate of his total touchdowns that come through the air at a higher rate than any coach. And obviously Aaron Rodgers has something to do with that. But it's carried over to Love as well. He's also really, really pass heavy when in the red zone. And so I do think that's important for Kraft and Jayden Reed. On that note, look up Jayden Reed and at JA Gibbs _23, and you will find some really cool historical comparisons in terms of what he has done on a fantasy point per target, that is only his receiving points. That doesn't even take into account that he scored 41 rushing fantasy points over the past 2 years. Over the past calendar year, Jayden Reed has averaged the same amount of receiving fantasy points per target as Nico Collins did last year. And I think that's really, really interesting. If you compare where he's pacing right now and also what he's done since he's entered the league, it's like up there with some of the best names to play the wide receiver position. Of course, that's somewhat due to the fact that he doesn't have a ton of targets. But like, man, for a player to be this efficient, this fast, I think he's only going to continue to get more involved, especially with, Wicks has already gone down. I think Wicks is the guy who's drawn targets at the highest rate of the receiving core. And so now it's just him and Dobbs and Watson. And I do think we're going to continue to see the offense really funnel through him. I have Reed at wide receiver 10 rest of season, and everyone tells me that's too low, way too low.
That's not too low.
I think they might have a case. Like, he's been that good and the offense is that good, and he might just continue to get better. He seems to only be getting better, and he's still really young. And he contributes as a rusher and receiver. So yeah, he's a stud. If you have Reed, you could consider selling low on him, but I just don't know that I would. The one guy I wanted to bring up is, would you rather have Reed or Cooper Kupp? Because I had Kupp ahead of him, and I don't know if that's right.
Is Cooper Kupp playing this week? Can you tell me that?
It seems like we're trending in that direction.
No, I need you to tell me if he's actually playing. If he, because Cooper Kupp is not just. It's not just production data for him. He's older. He keeps getting hurt. Like,
yeah,
it sucks because the injury the most recent ankle injury that he suffered, like, that's a fluky injury that would have happened to anybody. But he's older, so the recovery time stretches out, and should he get another injury, like, that could be really, like, that could be another extended absence. So that's part of the risk. If you could magically video game God mode remove that risk, then it's easily Cooper Kupp for me, where, like, Reed has the week one, like, I want people to don't lose sight of what happened in week one. That game was broken. That field in Brazil was, like, defenders couldn't react. They couldn't grip the turf. And so these huge plays that happened for Jayden Reed, 138 yards and a touchdown on 4 receptions, and then the 33-yard rushing touchdown. Like, defenders couldn't do anything. Like, that game for me, legitimately awesome, real fun. That game went immediately into the garbage for me.
It's a great point.
This is not something that is prescriptive. And then, of course, the next 2 weeks, that's Malik Willis and the really high T. We're going to run the ball 4 bajillion times with Josh Jacobs. Those games go into the dumpster for me as too. So now the sample's really, really small for Jayden Reed. It was everything happened in the second half catch-up game for Minnesota. And then the following 2 weeks were just 6 targets apiece, 4 for 78. That's a good game. But then 6 for 28. So Reed is a tremendous player, but he is, especially just for looking at what he's done for this year, it's difficult. Like, you can't just take the box score at face value. There's so much context that is missing. So I'm in on Reed, but the people who are calling for him to be higher than wide receiver 10 rest of season, that's too aggressive for me.
I think that's good perspective. And he's still only playing in 3 receiver sets. He's basically playing like Josh Downs' role. So I do think that is important to remember. All right, we're going to go as quickly as we can here on Zay Flowers. You are a Zay Flowers fan. Am I remembered that correct, Mike?
Yes, big time.
I thought so.
Big time.
Okay, so he is top 100 all-time in terms of receiving yards produced through an initial 22 games, just ahead of Reed, ahead of DJ Moore, Deebo Samuel, Santonio Holmes, Jeremy Maclin, just behind Devontae Smith, T. Higgins, T.Y. Hilton, Deshaun Jackson. So that's the range of players he's been in to start his career as a receiver. He also does get some rushing. He has a 28% target share in year 2. That's massive. That's top 5 in the entire NFL. His per route data is up across the board. His per route data this year is basically identical to year 2 Chris Olave. And all of his rates are basically identical to CeeDee Lamb year 2 as well, except Lamb wasn't targeted as high of a rate. But they produce fantasy points at the same exact per route basis. So that's interesting to me from a long-term perspective. I will say both those names I brought up only scored 232 points in year 2, so it wasn't some massive season. Zay Flowers is currently pacing for 232 on the dot. That's wide receiver 16 last year. He finished as the wide receiver 31 last year with 206 points. So I'm curious where he falls for you guys. Obviously, we've talked about Flowers a lot, so we don't need to get into the team level stuff of like sometimes Baltimore goes really run heavy and all of that. I think with all of that considered, just looking at him as a player long term, how high do you think the ceiling is? And then for this year, where do you think he does fall into the range? Do you think he can be in that wide receiver 16 range like Olave and CeeDee Lamb and kind of like he's training for right now? Or do you think he's lower? Because Fantasy Pros rest of season has him wide receiver 23 in between DJ Moore and T. Higgins and Brian Thomas and Terry McLaurin.
I would take him ahead of DJ Moore. Zay Flowers is, in my opinion, a true top-tier talent, and I don't know what to make of the year. Because, like, the week 1, that's, like, this is what I'm expecting. So, like, that was a full prior confirmation bias of, like, the guy is electric. He can, like, if he's not breaking a tackle or juking a guy on every single catch, it's surprising when he doesn't successfully do it. But it was 6 catches for 37 yards. Like, that is, that's what year 1 was as a rookie. And then occasionally you'd get the big play. So it was going to be inconsistent. An okay guy you could start every week because he's such a good player and one broken play here or there, and now you have a great fantasy week. And that's kind of how the first 4 weeks went. So that's what I'm saying. I don't know what to make of him because the last 2 games, it was the Bengals and it's Washington. Like, and they scored 41 and 30 points on top of that. But the volume was so good, and it wasn't simply, hey, throw the ball quickly to Zay Flowers. Go do something, Zay. Please do something. It was, no, the guy's actually like getting some intermediate targets. Like we're downfield at least a little bit here, which it was if you told me the Ravens are going to commit to intermediate targets to Zay Flowers, that would be okay, all in, instead of where my position coming into the season was he's such a good player, but everything around him, I don't know. I don't see the path for him to deliver what people are expecting. And he fit all the criteria of a rookie who broke out going into year 2. This is someone that we should really be going heavy after. But the system left me really concerned about what was going to happen. And so I don't know. Like, I don't really have a strong take here for Zay Flowers. Look, people out there, it's okay to not have a strong take if you don't truly believe one side or the other. You don't have to.
Wait and see. We'll get more information.
Yeah.
I have a quick yes or no question for you, and then I have an
Okay.
interesting point I want to bring up and throw it to Dan. Do you think, from your player evaluation of Zay coming in, that he is somebody who can win consistently in that deep and intermediate area? Because it's not like he was just a slot guy in college. Boston College, am I remembering that right?
Yeah.
He was used on the perimeter down the field quite a bit more. Do you think that he can be that type of player? Because I was a little concerned watching his year 1 film. I didn't watch a ton of him in college. Do you think so? Is that the kind of guy, or do you think there's a reason that he hasn't been asked to do that much?
So I'll jump in real quick here. So
Okay.
Zay Flowers, to me, watched a ton of his tape. He was in the mix for the Giants last year in the draft. There was no receiver in college football in that draft class last year that had more unrealized deep passing yards than Zay Flowers, besides Tyler Scott, maybe Tyler Scott. And what I mean by that is plays where the offensive line broke down, or plays where the quarterback just didn't process it well and didn't get the ball out there, or plays where the quarterback was off target at Boston College. He was a double move extraordinaire at Boston College, just killing these corners on these double moves on the vertical plane. We haven't seen that yet in Baltimore, really, for the most part. We've seen him in the intermediate a little bit. I think he still runs like the best deep out in all of football, basically. It's like a cheat code almost for him and Lamar throws that ball really well. But they haven't been able to connect on the vertical path. And this is kind of what draws me back on Zay Flowers. Like, putting him into a tier that I want to put him in from a fantasy standpoint. I always talk about this, Jacob, and I'll repeat it because I was high on Derrick Henry for this reason. Everyone hated me for it. this game is still, you have to score touchdowns to score points in fantasy football. Touchdowns are still, and we always say, oh, touchdown regression. We can't predict touchdowns. You somewhat can. Like Derrick Henry was going to score 17 plus touchdowns in this offense as long as he stayed healthy. There was no debate needed. Gus Edwards scored 13. Like very simple stuff. Now with Flowers, where are the touchdowns coming from? If he's not being utilized on that vertical plane, he's not really much of a red zone threat either. So that's my issue with Flowers. Where is he scoring the touchdowns? PPR leagues, I'm fine moving him into this like second tier that we want to move him into. But for non-PPR or half PPR, I still struggle with it.
That's a really good point. Okay, so my last thing here, and then we'll wrap up, Dan. Zay Flowers, according to Fantasy Points data, has the highest average separation score when facing man coverage. He also has the highest percentage of his routes against man coverage where he created multiple steps of separation, where he's getting big wins. I love that. I think that's really important. I'm really curious to hear what Matt Harmon of Reception Perception has to say about his man coverage data, because in his first year, it was like, okay, Zay can clearly crush a zone, and that's really important for Lamar because teams play a lot of zone against them. But we didn't see a lot of that where he was beating man coverage. And so far, it seems that he's taken a big step forward there. So I think that's really cool.
Yep, I'm excited to see where it goes. Mike, thank you so much for joining us today. This was awesome. Really appreciate it. Let the people know before we get out of here one more time where they can find all your work.
Sure. You find me on Twitter or Instagram at FFHitman, or I'm on Twitch now too. Streaming some games, but thefantasyfootballers.com. That's the hub for anything. You'll find links to the podcast there. That's just our rankings, our premium memberships, all that stuff. Thefantasyfootballers.com.
Everybody else, have a great rest of your weekend. We'll talk to you soon on Monday with some more Beyond the Box Score.